Hello and welcome to my very first episode of Every Possible Commander, where I go over one of the 1,000+ commander deck combinations from the game Magic the Gathering. If you don't know anything I just said, I'm sorry, not gonna be rude by saying this, but I don't think this is the series for you. There's so much to go over in both Magic as a game and its format Commander. I will just say that's a nerdy as shit card game where I owe half my grades in high school to, both for better and for worse. I'll link some good explanations for Magic in the description if you're actually curious on getting to understand this series, but it takes forever. I decided to start this series that will probably never conclude properly with a more topical spoiler. Ravnica Allegiance spoilers have been coming out pretty rapidly up until the weekend, as they tend to do. One of the spoilers that fascinated me the most was the new version of Rakdos, the Showstopper, one of the last surviving characters from original Ravnica. And if Niv Mizzet dies, then so do I. Anywho, I like this from a lore perspective, as it shows Rakdos finally getting a role in society as an entertainer. Yay! A BDSM entertainer. But you know what? Each to their own, as long as I'm not part of it. You do you, as long as you don't do me. So, as a legendary creature, he can be a commander. Despite his character usually being kind of boring, his cards never are, and they tend to be some of the most creative red and black cards out there. This one synthesizes janky tri-tribes, coin flips, sacrifices, and one-sided board wipes with enter the battlefield effects, and a very beefy boy. As it says here, he's 4 mana, 1 black, 1 red, for a 6/6 flying, trampling legendary creature demon. Oh boy. When he enters the field, you can flip a coin for each creature that isn't a demon, devil, or imp, and destroy each creature whose coin comes up tails. First of all, it's a chance ability. In terms of things that people like in Commander, that's very divisive. Some people hate the randomness, but some people love it. In terms of a coin flip strategy, all you have to work with is Kark's Thumb. The other cards refer to winning. Either tails or heads can be a win. It just has to be what you call in the air. This, it always is tails, and you may feel like a winner technically, but if it's built into the card, yeah, sorry. So we have a one-sided board wipe to work with. This will also greatly affect the deck building. One thing that's almost a necessity for decks in multiplayer Commander is the board wipe, but we have one from the command zone, and given how many cute tricks I got, if we can't play them at an opportune time, we were probably so dead anyways. There is no point in using slots for things like Damnation if we have a bit more interesting 6 mana, 6/6 who can tear half our opponent's creatures and none of our own. And that's where the real bulk of the deck comes in. Demons, Imps, and Devils. What an odd assortment of unfathomable, confounding creatures. Sadly, this also leads the creature base to being kind of odd and mediocre. It isn't limited fodder, but in terms of tribal decks, well, let's just say we're not playing elves here. In fact, given all the things going on, this won't be a tribal deck at all. We just need to focus on getting the best creatures of the types that won't die. And given the creature types, we can do aggressive and kind of tricky Imps and Devils in the early game, while late game demons can just thrash the opponents. We can do enough weird stuff with Rakdos, if you know what I mean, and kill enough stuff so that we can attack without anyone standing in our way, which is what aggro decks love and will be the way we'll try to win. So, what are the best creatures? We are sadly not going to emphasize card draw and mana as much as I usually would love to. I tend to make even normal decks almost feel like a combo deck in terms of how the engine runs. So we need to rely on cheap creatures. Let's go over each creature type first. Let's go with the most commonly played creature type, and easily the most powerful, the demons, the Amit brothers. As you can see, the curve for demons already has a high start. Even 3 mana, they're pretty solid. Amit Eternal starts as a 5/5 It will always do at least 3 points of damage due to afflict. Well, it's not technically point damage, it's point loss. This is important to get past blockers that will assuredly clog the early game. His second ability is a bit anti-synergistic, as a lot of board wipes cause people to frantically refill their board with spells as much as they can. Unfortunately, that means you'll get a lot of -1/-1 counters. Baleful Ammit is meh. Lifelink is the only reason it's really in the deck, but it can sometimes work, as it gives a -1/-1 counter to a creature you were gonna have get killed anyway. Herald of Torment, it's a pitiful late game value, but it flies, and how clogged the early game is in terms of the ground, flying is worth life for a turn, especially given how often sacrifices happen in this deck. Soul Age Fiend also provides non-combat ground life loss. It's more positive for us than Herald of Torment, as it affects everyone for 3 life only once. Taurian Mauler will get huge and is actually the reverse of Baleful Ammit, and may discourage an onslaught of spells, so it has a nice political edge. Spawn of Mayhem, another new creature, is always very cheap, can be very, very cheap, and is always a brute, and is always very powerful. Flying, trample, 4/4, can get bigger if you're dying. You're probably going to be dying. This deck, I'll admit, isn't the best. But yeah. Now, as we move on to the 4 mana curve, we get some heavy hitters and above the curve creatures. These 3 are some of the earliest heavy hitters. Archdemon of Poliano has no drawback. It swings for 5 in the air, and Demon of Catastrophes makes you sacrifice a creature, which is a bigger drawback in this deck than in most decks that can properly utilize sacrifice. But he's got the stats of our commander for 2 less, so it's worth it. Desecration Demon is OP, sometimes gets tapped but kills creatures and gets stupid big, and he's always has an above the curve body. The worst part for your opponents is that once you destroy all their stuff, they won't be able to sacrifice. So you already have an 8/8 by the time Rakdos comes into play, and so he's just, maybe it's enough to end the game. Speaking of Rakdos, this Rakdos deck starring Rakdos is also guest starring Rakdos. He's more complicated than the others, but still a brute for his mana cost. You have to attack first, generally speaking. He's more complicated as he acts like a ramp spell in some ways, though not the turn he enters. His stats are good. He causes ramp. When you attack, this deck gets expensive, so it's all a win-win. He's got a very stiff mana cost though. 5 and up section is a bit more precarious. Instead of being just aggro machines, ironically the more expensive ones tend to have worse stats. That's because they're about card advantage, whether it's in creature destruction, drawing cards, flexibility, such as Archfiend of Ifnir, which you can cycle away. Alternatively, Demon of Death's Gate can be anywhere from 0 to 9. Actually, not anywhere from, it is just one or the other. But it's always the nastiest thing in the deck. So, we went over the demons and their strategy. Let's go over the Imps and Devils, as they serve one purpose together: early pressure. Imps are a bit trickier and more combo-y, but Devils can also be more tricky in a more destructive way. And they may be early pressure, but sometimes they end up being blockers when you realize that Modern Zoo isn't good as a commander deck. For 1-drops, they are surprisingly unpredictable with their arsenal. They can ping creatures, be a large burn spell, a 4/3 for 1. They can pick your opponent's worst card in hand. They can have late game value, or even part of a combo. But sadly, I don't think Putrid Imp really combos that much in this deck, so it'll just be a 2/2 for 1, which is already very solid. And you will probably achieve Threshold at some point or another. 2-drop slot is basically the same as the 1-drop slot, similar to the Demons 5 and 6 drops being smaller than the 4 drops. The same can be said for the 3 drops of the Imps and the Devils with regards to the earlier drops. Once again, it's because they provide very useful card advantage. Cadaver Imp gets someone you lost, and you'll lose a lot more than you want in this deck. Sin Prodder packs a punch, sometimes packs another punch, or packs more cards. Suit Imp, once again, has a political edge and discourages spellcasting, which, once again, can be useful. Stinkweed Imp is here not for the traditional dredge. Dredge was intended to be a mechanic that the more there was, the worse it was, in terms of the dredge number. But it was a mechanic with a disadvantage that was intended to be turned on its head and turned into an advantage given the block. Sadly, went a bit too far in Eternal formats. It's looking at you, Bulgari Grave Troll. But mostly it's for when he dies, he can come back, and that's useful. So Stinky might be a bit of limited fodder here, but he's still recursive, which is valuable in this particular deck. For the 4 and 5 drops, and 1 3-drop I forgot to mention because it's none of those races, Hellrider, Judith, and Scourge Devil provide life insurance policies. Very useful for the underworld, I know. They provide creature power boosts as well, and it both stacks as well as gets through attackers sometimes with Hellrider. Judith and Hellrider stack. Sadly, Scourge Devil only does it via battlefield entry. Scourge Familiar is very expensive given its power and toughness, but you see that symbol Urza Saga? It's probably expensive for a reason, unlike a lot of sets where they're expensive for no reason. Here, you can choose and discard a card to add black to your mana pool. That is one of the most important parts of the deck when you're a little behind. You need to ramp fast, and that's a very good way to do it. It isn't as good in this deck as it is in other decks where the discarding can be used to a greater effect, like Garna, but Scourge Familiar is an imp, and it has a lot of value there. So you won't kill it with Rakdos, so yay. Obviously, I've been rather critical with many of the creatures in the deck. Strange, why would I play a deck with bad creatures? Well, I mean, you still might not. But there's a reason to play these. And I'm not just relying on the commander entirely. I lie. We are relying on the commander and its ETB effect. There are other ways to abuse it multiple times. You can rely on commanders more when it's just an enter the battlefield effect. These 5 artifacts are some of the strangest in the game, but they all do the same thing. All they really do is increase the likelihood of the coin flips going in your favor. Sure, your creatures are bad, but it's better than nothing, and that's what your opponent is going to have for a good chunk of the game with these things. And that's the deck's main goal. Having our horrible, horrible creatures have a rite of passage to beat way freely, and it'll be fun. Oddly enough, these janky beasts are a big portion of the deck's price. They're some of the weirdest cards in the game, and yet they all come together to do the same thing. Repeat the Showstopper's performance. That pun was awful. It was so bad I deserved to be whipped by... Oh no. Fuck, Rakdos. No, I was just kidding. Get the leather. Get that leather thong away from you. No, not the spikes. So after I've been traumatized, bruised, beaten, filled with demon STDs, and some ungodly things I didn't even know existed, they were so bad, there's still more to talk about. You got, you know, the normal stuff you kinda need a bit in these types of decks, mana and card draw. The removal is via creatures, due to the ETB effects that were mentioned with the prior artifacts. Also, you don't care if an ETB creature dies. Rakdos Key Rune can become a devil, so it doubles as mana ramp and, you know, a little Satan. Though, when Rakdos enters the battlefield, I'm probably not going to pay 2 mana to make an artifact a creature. If Conjurer's Closet is in play, though, it's a definite plus, as you can activate it freely without having to worry about your mana ramp dying. Liliana's Contract is mostly for card draw and weird enter the battlefield synergy. I'm not even sure if the other artifacts really interact with enchantments. But also has a minor upside of randomly winning the game. Literally, it says that. Diabolic Intent is now cheapened after the reprints, so if you don't want a card and you need a card, here's that card. So that's the deck. It's not the most polished, so despite being a budget deck, it's budget by Magic the Gathering standards. Kind of sad. I don't own these cards, but I've simulated them on tappedout.net. Net.com. Don't make the same mistake I did. I am not sponsored, but they've been very useful for allowing me to post my EDH decks in a semi-incomplete manner. It's a lot of complicated stuff to do a simple thing. Kill your opponents with awful creatures. This will never be tier 1, and it's $177, so I understand it's flawed, so people can discuss that in the comments and ways to improve it, so I've told you everything you need to know in case you want to try this deck. It's understandable if you don't. It's not for everyone. Heck, it's not necessarily for me. I'm just getting a little sad whenever I see sacrifice and discard without any payoff in this deck. I usually do that. Though from a creative perspective, it's always good to expand your horizons and what you're willing to do. And this series, every commander deck ever, has really helped me in terms of expanding my mind. Next time I can do either another Ravnica Allegiance deck or a user suggested commander, which I'll try to be a bit more creative with than you might expect. But hope you all have a good day, and don't let Rakdos whip you.
Blood dies, D&D will give you AIDS. Then you'll go to hell with all the Catholics and Jews and play Magic the Gathering with Satan.